Welcome to the Channel City Camera Club program night. We have a great program for you. I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Programs, Deb Gibson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. And I have to say, I have the best job in all of Camera Club. And when I vacate this position, you'd be lucky to have it. But I get to seek out the best of the best. So Elliot is another person that I stalked. He has been a club judge for us. And Elliot, I can't remember when we first started talking. You were traveling and I was traveling. I mean, it was at least 6 months ago. And I said, would you be interested? And you said yes. And then I told him who we had lined up and, you know, what kind of topics and to choose what he would like to do. And he told me that he was working on this idea of finding a project for yourself. So anyway, you can see from his bio, he's a graduate both of Brooks and then an instructor at Brooks. Worked in New York, Los Angeles. I mean, a lot of innovative first, you know, kind of things. We're happy that he landed in Santa Barbara. Does nonprofit work with his photography, which I love. Anyway, so when he floated this idea, I said that would be perfect because I, for one, need to have for myself an assignment to go do this, go do that. So anyway, Elliot, without further ado, dazzle us with.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and Deb. And I think it has been at least 6 months since we started talking. But what you just said is a very interesting point, and that is that you need an assignment. And so many people use the phrase "out of the box." Think out of the box. Think out of the box. And I'm going, think out of the box. No. I'd rather give me the box that you want me to find my way out of. So if you tell me that I have to do such and such and such and such to make this thing happen, I find that a much easier place to stimulate the creative juices than for someone to say, just think outside the box, do whatever you want. Well, okay, I'd like to go to photograph penguins in Antarctica. Who's going to pay for that? I can't pay for that. So if you want me to think outside the box, you pay for it and we'll do it. I had a student one time and I gave them all a group assignment. And as they were working on the assignment, I asked one of the students, how's it going with your group? What are you doing? He goes, I think I cheated. And I said, what do you mean you think you cheated? And he goes, I asked my father, who is an engineer, how to solve this problem. And I said, that's not cheating. I said, what did he say? And he said, we were going to need hydraulic lifts and this and that and all of this equipment. And I said, great, call your dad back and tell him he has to pay for it and see if he has any other ideas. So without further ado, I have a presentation on creating your personal project. And I've been working on personal projects since about 2003 or before. And I'll explain sort of how I got to that place and where I started from. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and it's all in PowerPoint, so we can just follow along. I'll speak, and there'll be lots of pictures to look at. So let's see here if I can do this right. Did I get that right? Here it is. That one. It's that one. Share that one. All right, good. Okay, so let's see. All right, well, I found photography early in my life. And like most, I got hooked on seeing a print emerge in the developing tray. I joined a surf club in my hometown of Pasadena, and that got me onto the beach with surfers. And I was never really very good at the sport. But instead, I found myself on the beach making photos of my friends. And these were probably the first prints that I ever sold. In 1974, I started attending Brooks Institute of Photography. I knew I wanted to be involved with photography, but I just didn't know where. Brooks offered me the opportunity to explore those possibilities. And while always feeling like the artist, it became clear that making some money using my cameras would be necessary. Therefore, I started off in commercial photography. It may have hindered my financial career, but I tried to approach commercial photography through that artistic lens. Sometimes it was appreciated and others not so much. Bumping around commercial photography for 40 years, I had some successes and made a living with my camera. I moved back to Santa Barbara in 1994 after spending some time in New York and Los Angeles. And in 2005, I was invited to join the faculty of Brooks. Needing a master's degree to teach higher classes, I applied to the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, graduating in 2009 with my MFA degree. But I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself. While in the commercial world of photography, I frequently heard that one should specialize in something. And indeed, I knew colleagues who shot only cars or food or fashion. I, however, was a generalist. My interests were broad, and making photography for someone else, I was doing that for the money. So I took jobs that paid, like catalogs. I shot for Marantz Stereos, Patagonia, and a lingerie multi-level marketing catalog. I also shot many one-offs ads for Bank of America, T. Rowe Price, Sun-Made Raisins, and then there were the annual reports and lots of others. And one day, it might have been around 2003, I was lamenting that I hadn't made a photograph for any clients in a very long time. And my wife said to me, worse than that, you haven't made any for yourself either. This cut deep because she had exposed to myself my own vulnerabilities, but it did make me. So I went out and I bought some new cameras, Holga cameras. For those of you that don't know what those are, they are very cheap, plastic lensed, light leak prone, 120 film sized cameras. I decided I would shoot at least one roll of film per day and would not come home until that was done. After a while, a pattern started to emerge, and it was the beginning of my first personal project. Starting to see what it was about the cameras that worked for me and how to embrace the flaws and use them to my advantage. I made some rules, and they were simple rules. It began with making photographs of different types of succulents, but mostly agaves and cactuses. But with the caveat that something man-made had to also inhabit the photograph. That changed pretty quickly to it had to be a wall behind the plant to give it a background that was simplified and made the plant stand out. So there were my rules: cactus, wall, shoot a whole roll of film on that subject per day for about 2 years. During those years, I found lots of walls by driving around on streets I might not have ever been on before. And one day I found a wall with an agave in front of it that was just beginning to bloom up that giant asparagus stalk. You know, the type that we call century plants. Once they bloom, they die. But it takes almost a whole year. So a new rule had to be created to fold this idea into my project. A new rule? Sure, why not? Photograph this plant from approximately the same place at approximately the same time of day, twice a week. Sort of like the slowest, time lapse you can imagine. As part of this story, I was playing golf one day with a stranger, and we started talking about where we lived. He told me the place he called home, and I suddenly realized it was his house where I was making my century plant photos. I told him about my project and that he was going to buy it from me. After a year of photography, the plant was dead and removed, and now it was time to put together this whatever it was going to be. Scanning all the frames, cleaning and colorizing them all was very time consuming. But once that was done, I began to put together something. Weeks would go by. I would spend a few hours a day on it. And after a while, I hated what it looked like. And so I was so bored with it that I put it away for a while. And after a time, I started to think, if I never finish this, it can never fail. If I never finish this, it could never fail. I repeated that mantra for a few days until I got comfortable with that idea. I started to feel better. Weeks, even months had gone by, when once again, I found myself on a golf course with this homeowner. And he says to me, "Where's my picture?" My stomach started to hurt. The next day, I opened that file and returned to work on the whatever it was going to be. For 3 days, I did nothing else until one moment I sat back from the screen and realized it was done. Within about 2 weeks, I made a presentation to my golfing friend, and indeed, he did buy it. It was a great lesson for me. That body of work became my first one-man show at a gallery in Beverly Hills, and I sold about 10 pieces. Now, back to the Academy of Art University. Getting a Master's of Fine Arts degree is a process. Taking all the required classes, I began to understand more about the art side of, well, art. There I was told that even though I had already created a body of work and had to show at a legit gallery and sold some pieces, was it art or was it just decorative stuff? Ouch. While the rules were a good start, there was no heart involved in the work. In fact, one of the reasons I chose Hoga cameras for this first project is precisely because when using those cameras, there is no thinking involved. It was simple and thoughtless or thought-free. Point it, push the button, walk away. For my thesis project, to qualify for that MFA degree, I chose to photograph strangers that I would meet along Highway 395 in the Eastern Sierras. I chose that highway because of my personal history. As a child, I can remember going up and down that road to visit Yosemite with my parents and my siblings. The first line in my thesis is, "I can hear my mother's voice as she reads from books she checked out of the library about the flora, fauna, geology, and geography along Highway 395. That was how we traveled before FM radios, tape decks, CD players, and iPods. So there was my personal history, something important from my past. The strangers became the subject because I'm most interested in people and have spent so many years doing portraiture. But there needed to be more to the story in each photo. I can remember giving my final dissertation on my project. I was not immediately selected to pass, but had to rewrite my paper in 30 days. Explain more of my thoughts, more of what I was trying to do. At first, I was insulted and angry. But as I got back to work, I realized they were absolutely correct. I had missed or left out a huge part. Again, let's back up a little. In 1979, I rented, along with a fellow photographer, a portion of a building in downtown Los Angeles. It was an old Masonic temple on the corner of Pico and Figueroa. I believe it was built around 1906 and had one of the first elevators in Los Angeles. It was one of those where you had to close the gate and turn the handle to make it move up or down. Landing at the perfect place on the desired floor became a game and an art form. The studio was not only a place to make photographs, but it was a living space for us as well. These were heady days. I was interviewed by the Downtown Business newspaper as one of the first 50 artists to live in the downtown area. During the 1980s, this became very popular, but we were pioneers. And once again, not only was the studio a place to make photos, but it was a location as well. Photographers like Annie Leibovitz and Helmut Newton came there to make photos. Lots of commercials that played on television were made in our space. In fact, we made more money renting to others than the rent cost us during the year. Eventually, in 1987, the city of Los Angeles bought the building to raise it, put up the new portion of the LA Convention Center. This is the same corner where my building was. This is what it looks like today. I'd like to say the reason the Staples Center, or rather the crypto.com arena, is where it is today is because of me. Some hyperbole, but without the artists taking over a large unused spaces in the area, one could make that argument. I was the tip of the regentrification spear. Since the city had forced us out of our space, I moved into a house in Hollywood. Again, this was not only a place to make photography, but it was where I lived, and it became a location to use in photos. Having moved to Hollywood, I began to remember that I had promised myself that I would do 3 minutes of open mic comedy routine someday. So I joined the Groundling Theater in Hollywood and got training in improvisational acting and the writing of sketch comedy, not unlike Saturday Night Live. In fact, many people who have been on Saturday Night Live started out at the Groundlings. One of my fellow students there was Lisa Kudrow. She's in the lower right-hand corner of this photograph that I made. And then next to her is Eve Plum. And then the three above, the only one I can remember the name of is Audrey on the left, and the other two are fellow actors. They were doing a special show called the Girls Club, and they needed publicity shots, and so I made them for them. Having this training was a great asset in directing people in front of my camera. My kids say, "You'll talk to anyone." And I think it's a good thing. I mean, being comfortable enough to do it without pre-planning is that improv training. The ability to take the slightest suggestion and turn it into a conversation that is light, fun, and immediate is a talent I now possess, and I use it every day. Now, back to my thesis failure. The strangers or subjects in my photographs along Highway 395 were to be photographed with an intent. My intent had not been spelled out. My intent was to make a photograph of a person, a stranger I didn't know anything about, using what they looked like, where they were, and what they were wearing, so that the viewer could conjure a narrative about the subject. Whether it's true or not, that narrative was not my concern. That was for the viewer to figure out. The viewer plays an important role in photography. Once a picture is made or printed or displayed, it becomes the viewer's domain. What are they going to see? What they are going to see depends on what the photographer has left inside the frame, combined with that viewer's own personal experiences. It is just that we cannot control, but we must be concerned about as the artist. I've now had more than a decade to live with that thought process, and I understand it much more now. Armed with that freshly minted MFA degree, not only could I teach higher level classes at Brooks Institute, I now have a clearer idea of what a personal project took to manifest. Since my thesis project depended on me traveling to a destination that covered about 200 miles, upon completion, it was clear that it took too much time, too much money, and too much energy. However, not all projects have to happen linearly. They can take years with lots of time in between exposures. They can be ongoing while other projects are in process. There's a place in Wisconsin I get to visit regularly, like once a year for about a week or two. And sometimes a few years can go by without even a single visit. After taking so many photos there already, I can see bodies of work emerging. This is an organic process. I call this an organic process. And that's one of the ways to discover a project. Oops, I'm backing up. I'm sorry, I missed the wrong key. In 2013, I proposed to a group of photographers that I had known for some time that we play a game. We ended up calling it the Daily Photo Game. There is a website called just that where we display our game. You're all welcome to go and check it out. I first proposed it in January of 2013, but it took until May 1st to actually launch the site and start. Rules had to be worked out. It is, after all, a game. Since I was the founder, part of the deal was everyone had to pay to play. This afforded two things. One, it gave me a fund to spend for the expenses of the game, as well as it meant everyone else had skin in the game. One potential player asked the question, "What's the money for?" And my answer was commitment. The idea is once the first photograph was posted, the next photographer in line, there are always and only 10 photographers in the game, must make or choose a photograph that somehow speaks to the photograph from the day before. So there's a 24-hour window for that next photographer to produce his picture. So this is, I don't even know how many there are here, but this is about more than the first year of my submissions to the game. And this is another one. So if the first photo is of a red apple, the next photographer could post a yellow banana or a red car or a fruit salad or an apple tree. The game has been going on ever since. We just started our 10th year. Over the years, we have lost some of our players for different reasons. Over the years, posting has been a challenge. Once a player posted while he was climbing El Capitan. Another one was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I posted from Africa twice, Belize once, and from lots of other places around the USA. We have never missed a day. After starting the game, I started to develop strategies. It was, after all, a game. One strategy was to hoard my photographs and wait for a time to play them. Another was just to go out and make a photograph I'd been meaning to do for some time and just do it. To go south on the 101 from where I was living at the time took me along Santa Claus Lane. And I must have driven by the A-frame surf shop 1,000 times. I was so attracted to the fragileness of this business, a real mom and pop place that looked like it could close at any small calamity. It hasn't and won't, I'm sure. Also attractive to me was all the color and the clutter. I always wanted to document it, but was never quite sure how to go about it. Around this time, I was hired by a pottery manufacturer to take photos of their products. These were large pieces, all with glossy finishes. And at first thought was to place a perfect highlight down one side and fill the other side with a card. But this left me with a blown out highlight and the other lines that interrupted the quality of the finish. In my studio, we practiced with glossy objects and developed a way of using multiple exposures and Photoshop's blending modes to not only minimize those problems, but to make the products look great. So this became my solution for the A-frame surf photo. In my memory, we shot about 200 exposures of the A-frame. And then using Photoshop's blending modes and some masking, cloning, and healing brush, we put all of those together to get the final result. And wow, what a photo it is. A new project had emerged. I ended up photographing 16 surf shops from Santa Cruz to San Diego. The only reason I stopped doing them, it was time consuming and expensive. The travel and everything else. I thought if someone wanted this kind of work, they could hire me to do it. But it is a smallish personal project that I'm very proud of. So one thing leads to another. The game to the surf shops via pottery. Who would have thunk it? The current projects I'm more involved with on a daily basis now, I would call less organic. In fact, the rules were created before the project actually started, different from discovering them over time, like the cactus and the Holga pictures. This one there's the one I call Surfers of Santa Barbara started in 2016. I'm still working on it. Stuff has gotten in the way of this one to continue smoothly. Things like COVID and personal injuries that took me out of the game for a while. But those were just hiccups. The concept is this. Rule 1 is the surfer must be connected to Santa Barbara. This can be pretty loose. I collaborate with the subject to decide where their portrait will be taken and what they might wear. I decide the lighting. This part comes from years of experience and the years of improvisational training in life, as well as the improv school, the Groundlings in Los Angeles, where people like Lisa Kudrow study. During the photo session, I direct the surfer into positions and expressions I feel will help tell the story I want the viewer to be able to conjure. After the session, the surfer is asked to write something about what surfing means to them and send that to me, along with an introduction and contact information for my next subject. I figured out some years ago that I can no longer just walk up to people in Santa Barbara and ask them to pose for me, because now I kind of look like the old creep. So the introduction from one surfer to the other surfer to another surfer solves that issue. My second ongoing project I call Wabi Sabi. First off, Wabi Sabi is a worldview centered on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. The aesthetic is sometimes described as one of beauty that is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. I translate that to mean the patina of life on the faces of people. To accomplish this, I set up a small studio-like environment outside of a friend's workspace where he provided me with an extension cord and some power. Setting up raw strobes in a Rembrandt lighting pattern, the light was quite harsh. This was deliberate as to emphasize the patina I was looking for. Oh, and by the way, I was across the street from a bar down in the funk zone on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons. So many of the subjects were somewhat intoxicated. Yeah. Beyond that, I did very harsh processing on the raw captures. Once open in Photoshop, I added a background to give a sense of place to each portrait. It started out in color and since changed to black and white to suggest a timelessness for each picture. The background also ties them all together. So the rules are set up where there will be a parade of potential subjects. Convince passerbys to pose. Improvise the direction of the expression. Use harsh Rembrandt-style lighting, strong processing, and turn them into black and white, and further exaggerate the patina. I will also send a JPEG version to each person for their social media usage as a thank you. And some people have commented they are unhappy with the way they look. I have responded with my artist statement describing my project. Usually I don't get a second email from them. Since my last session in the funk zone, my friend has left his workspace and I am unable to continue in that spot. So I'm looking for another place, hopefully across from a day drinking bar, if anybody has any opportunity for me. If you're interested in creating a real body of work, think up your rules. I like to think about what I am personally interested in. In my case, it usually involves portraiture. I find people most interesting. But say it's birds or cactus. Choose not only something you are interested in, but something that is plentiful and local, like surfers in Santa Barbara. Create a way to involve yourself in that group of subjects. Make rules about how each of them is going to be photographed. Like if it's birds, will they only be flying or silhouetted at sunset, or with a 300mm lens, or only close up, or whatever. Finally, figure out how to get from one photo to another visually. What is the connection between the body of work besides the photographer's name? Another good place to start is by reviewing your existing work. What do you have already that has some connection? This could be the organic link that you're looking for. Start where you are and use what you have. And that's my best advice. Start where you are and use what you have. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Wow.
How's that?
Great.
There we go.
Good, good. All right, I'm happy to ask and answer any questions if you have any. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
I have one. So I have a lot of thoughts for projects, but they never get off my computer. How do you motivate yourself, or how do you get that first kick in the seat of the pants to really get you moving?
well, in my case, it was my wife, right? She said,
I don't have
you haven't taken any pictures for yourself, you know, I mean, so maybe I would give you that advice.
Mhm.
You haven't taken any maybe you haven't taken any pictures for yourself, and that's what you really need to do. Other than that, start with one picture. Take one project that you have on your computer and make one picture for it and see if it's even doable. When I thought about my project on Highway 395, I drove out there one day and said to myself, I'm just going to see if it's possible.
Mhm.
And I was driving around and I would say, oh, here's a great location. Here's a beautiful scene. Nobody's here. How come they're not here enjoying this scene with me? Well, everybody's moving. Everybody's going someplace. They're not out there waiting for me to come along. So I quickly realized that people, I had to go where the people were going to be. That's where I was going to find them. So that's what I did. I went and found people and tried to do my idea. And I did a couple of trips like that. And so I also was reading at the time Richard Avedon's book, The American West, I think it was called. And he, you know, those are the pictures that he did with like the guy covered in bees and all the guy with the rattlesnakes and that kind of stuff. And he said that he would go to cities in the American West during their annual festivals or during their annual events, because that's when the people came out. So he did some research on the different places that he wanted to go to find when to be there. I started to go to Lone Pine in early October each year. I went there 3 times during my project, because they had the Lone Pine Film Festival, and people would show up dressed up as cowboys, and there would be, you know, gunfights in the middle of the street and horses parked on sidewalks and lots and lots of characters. I showed a few of the pictures that you might remember in this presentation. So that became a real destination to go to. But the hard part about that was, or the stumbling block a little bit on that was, is that it took me, I had to drive 200 miles even before I got to my first location. And then I had to stay there for days at a time to make the photographs, basically. And then I would have to find the people, convince them to pose for me, and then do the rest of that stuff. So how do you get that swift kick in the bottom? I think you just make the first picture. Make the first picture and see if it's possible. When I started my surfer project, I started with a guy that I've known since I was 2 years old. He's a great surfer. We grew up together. I knew he would be a sympathetic subject, because if I really messed it up, he would let me do it again. Mm-hmm. So I started there with somebody who I knew, who loved me and cared about me and would let me make mistakes. And I think that's the other thing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. When I would teach school, the students would say, well, I've never done this before. How do I mix the developer? I've never done it before. Would you help me? And I go, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Make mistakes early and often. I hope that helped.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, during all the closure, I made so many pictures every day that, you know, I have a lot of backlog too. And some of those are in patterns and could put them into project. But then again, what it sounds like what you did a lot was had the idea and then went out and took picture one at a time for that project.
Yes and no. I mean, my ongoing projects are the Wabi Sabi, the surfers, the place in Wisconsin, which takes years. Mm-hmm. And the cactus work was accidental. Mm-hmm. I just started taking pictures and this pattern emerged. So I think that maybe that's another good place to start, is to look at your backlog of work and group stuff together in catalogs that group stuff together that you're interested in, and that is plentiful and accessible to you, so that you're not driving 200 miles. You know, I towed a trailer so I could stay in my trailer. I towed a trailer, you know, and lived in a trailer while I was doing my project. So I made it hard. I made it harder on myself than it had to be. I didn't have to go. I could have chosen a project that, you know, I never left Santa Barbara for, but I wanted to go with something historical, something that touched my heart. And when I wrote that first sentence about my mother, it was impactful for me. And when I started driving up and down Highway 395, there's this red cinder cone right by Little Lake. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I can remember being about 8 years old and driving along with my father in the car. And he pointed that cinder cone out to me and he said, "That's a volcano." And I said, "Then why are we here?" And he goes, because it's dormant. And that volcano became a symbol of my father. And during the time that I was working on this project, my father passed away. Oh. And so every time I drove up 395 and every time I drove down 395, I passed that cinder cone and it gave me a chance to think about my father. And so it was that personal connection that made the work more meaningful, not only to me, but I hope it translated to the viewer. And like I said, the viewer is really important. You need to be concerned about the viewer and what they're going to see and what you're trying to tell them, or what you want them to be able to figure out from the picture. Sometimes it's uncontrollable because you might not be there when they're viewing the picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. That was a good one.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is just look Well, I have 3 questions. So one is, have you ever been to the Fossil Falls there by the Cinder Cone?
Of course.
Okay, guys, just some people
I
pass
spent-
by there all the
Night there
time.
in my trailer. I spent the night there in my trailer.
Uh,
I could wake up at sunrise and photograph the cinder cone in honor of my father.
yeah. So my other questions though are, one, are there sort of things you've learned that you realize were not helpful in putting a project together?
Yeah, don't travel so far. You know, that was probably the biggest thing that I learned was that don't make it so difficult. You know, the Wabi Sabi, I think I've done maybe 6 sessions in front of that bar, across the street from that bar. And that's all I have. That's all I've, and you know, and everything that I have is from those 6 sessions. I'd love to do another 6. I'd love to do another dozen sessions. I think they're fun and it gives me something to do. And I enjoy meeting the people.
And the last question I have is, you have the cactus that you did, which started out as sort of a personal project.
It started out as personal therapy.
Personal therapy,
Yeah.
but then you ended up with a show
Yeah.
out of it. So do you start these projects with an idea that maybe you'll be able to promote them to something more public? Or
So that's a really good question. And my answer is going to be more complicated than probably you wanted me to say, but
no, I want to hear it all.
okay. I believe that as an artist, if I'm going to call myself an artist, I have to be willing to do the work and then show it to people who are qualified to have an opinion about it. Not my mother, not my teacher, not my wife, not my friends. And I need to be able to take the heat and then I need to repeat it. So if I'm not willing to show it, and if I'm not willing to take the heat, then I'm going to require that I call myself a what's the word I'm looking for here? Not an amateur, but a hobbyist. If I'm doing it for the love of it, that's good. If I'm doing it for the fun of it, that's good. If I'm doing it for personal satisfaction, that's fine. But now it's a hobby. It's not, I wouldn't call myself an artist. So I want to call myself an artist. And so therefore I have to be willing to put the work out there and take the heat. I spent 40, 50 years in the commercial photography world. And therefore everything that I ever did that I thought was good enough or better than that, I was trying to show to potential clients, which is what a website's all about, which is what portfolios were all about. So I've made books out of the Surfer Project already. I've made books out of the Wabi Sabi, and I've shown them to potential clients and that sort of thing. The cactus work is unusual because it was started for therapy. And serendipitously, I had my Porsche picture, which I think I showed in this presentation of the yellow 1957 Porsche Speedster with the palm trees. Did I show you that picture at some point?
Yes.
Yes, good.
It's sitting in between 2 tall ones.
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah.
I shot that on Butterfly Beach. And I had that hanging at the Padero Beach Grill. It was for sale down there, and I would sell one every few months or so. And a guy called me one afternoon and he said, I saw your picture at the Padero Beach Grill, and I have a gallery in Beverly Hills. Would you like to do a show? And I said, yeah, but I don't have a show of all that kind of stuff like that. But I do have some bodies of work that I wouldn't mind letting you look at and choose from. And he goes, okay. And so I went down with my cactus work and he said, yeah, let's do this. And so that's how that show started. And then I went, okay, I'll do it. And then I thought, how am I going to pay for this? You know, because you got to print all the prints. And as you might have seen, they were all big.
Mhm.
They all got to get framed. I got to transport them to LA and then back home. And as soon as I committed to that, I got another phone call from somebody else who said, I saw this Porsche picture with the 2 palm trees, and we'd like to use it worldwide for a hair care product company. And I said, okay. And we negotiated a price, and it paid for the show. So the picture of the Porsche got me the show, and it paid for the show. But the show was of the cactus. So, you know, I'm willing to proceed through a door that opens and hopefully not forget something after I walk through that door. But I also then have become more deliberate with my intention. And I think that that's what the academy, that's what getting my master's degree taught me, was that I can't just do it without intention. And so that's why I now have these 2 projects that started, what I would call less organically and more cerebrally. So it can go either way. So don't think that you have to invent the rules first, unless there's something that you're really interested in, that you say, hey, this is what I want to do. I only want to do this for a year. You're not doing only that for a year. You're doing lots of other stuff. I mean, we're photographers, you know, we could take hundreds of thousands of frames a year. But the ones that we do with the intention of creating a body of work have to be given some special consideration. Does that make sense?
All of it, yes.
Okay, so my answer was a little circuitous, but I hope I got you there.
Yeah, no, I was asking because I used to weave, and every Christmas I was part of a store, and you know, I would weave what sells. And I made good money and I sold a lot, but then I came to hate it. And I always sort of worry a little bit about that.
But back to my statement about the artist versus the hobbyist, I think a check is a pretty good review.
That's true.
If someone's willing to buy it, that's a pretty good review.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a simple question, especially following this last 3 questions. When you took off on your 395 project and you packed your car, what lighting equipment did you take with you? Because their lighting is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I took along Dynalite strobe packs and and 2 or 3 heads, because I wanted to make sure I had a backup in case something failed. And I think it was a 3 foot by 4 foot softbox.
Okay.
That the strobes went in. And I also had a piece of equipment called a Vagabond. And a Vagabond is available at, I'll come up with the name of it in a while. But anyway, it's a battery pack. You can charge it up at the house, and then it will charge the strobe pack. These strobe packs I bought in 1987. I'm still using them today.
Oh.
But the Vagabond is a thing. The first one I bought was I don't know, like that. The second one I bought was like that, and the third one is less than a foot tall and 3 inches wide. And it's the most compact, it's the most lightweight, it's the best, it carries the most power. So I plug my power pack into that. I turn on the Vagabond, I turn on the power pack charges, and then I have pocket wizards attached to the camera and attached to the power pack. And then I one of the things that I learned on my first initial trips was that I can't do this without help. So I always had a partner with me, I always had a friend. And they would come along and I would feed them and water them for the 3 or 4 days that we were there together. And they would hold my light on a light stand under my direction. So I'd say, move left, move right, up or down or here and there. And I used to do, in the 90s, before pre-digital, I invented a thing that I called the magic box. And the magic box was a room that I could build on location. It was 10 feet by 10 feet by 20 feet. And I could cover this room. It was a skeleton made out of speed rail. And then I could cover the room with either all black or all white, or a mixture of black and white, depending upon how I wanted it to look. And inside the room would go my subject, my lights, and my camera. So it gave me a studio environment with the back window open with the natural scene outside. But I had all the control of the studio out in nature.
Wow.
It was big, it was complicated. I needed 2 assistants for that. So when digital came along, I found that if I put the light in really close to somebody, I would get the fall off that I like. In portraiture, I'm most interested in the shadows. That's what really gets me, is the shadows. And so I want my light to fall off rapidly so that the shadows are exaggerated, which is why wabi-sabi interests me so much.
Okay.
So if I put the light in really close to the person, now the light is in the picture. In the old days of film, I always had to have the light far enough away that it wasn't inside the frame. So with digital, I brought the light really close to the person, click, 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 take the light out of the picture, take a background plate, merge the 2 together in Photoshop, wipe out the light, and that's how I would get that rapid fall off. And you would wonder, as the viewer, where'd that light come from?
Right.
You know, and I loved it when my photographer friends would go, where's that light coming from? Because the people who were trained in light, like photographers, they go, where's the light coming from? And people who aren't trained in light go, something's different about this picture. So that was part of my intent, was to have the viewer have a sense of that wonder.
Vagabond is made by Paul C. Buff.
Paul C. Buff, there's Ralph, my friend. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you. Good
Oh, nice to
presentation.
see you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, good to see you. Yeah, Paul C. Buff, that's right. I'm getting to the age now where I don't remember that stuff. It's right behind me. I could go look at it. Anyway, that was a good question.
Well, here's another question. Okay. You're probably familiar with Tom's Place.
Thomas Place?
Tom's Place.
Tom's Place, sure. Yeah, I photographed there.
Okay, I've been trying to photograph that at night for about 3 years. Just wrestling with the light from the incandescent light and the shadows and things like this. I've tried bracketing like 10 stops with a wide angle lens. It's really difficult to do because there's a lot of cars there, and I don't want the cars in front of Tom's Place unless they're old cars, which sometimes happens, or old Harley Davidsons. Anyway, I continue to try to do that, and I guess maybe the next time I'll try painting with light or something like that. But that's my project.
That's a good one.
finish it.
The 10-stop bracket. If you are you trying to put those together with a program that takes those 10 pictures and puts them together for you? What's that called? The
HDR.
HDR. Yeah, thank you, Ralph.
Yeah.
Ralph's my wingman.
Yes, kind of. I'm using. I just use stacking in Photoshop.
So try putting it together manually. Try each layer individually in Photoshop and
Okay.
adjust each layer individually until you get to an aesthetic that you like for each portion of the building. In fact, you might use the same frame at a different exposure or a different blending mode for different sides of the building. So try putting it together individually. That might be a way to take what you already have and see if you can make it work.
Right.
So you have to be familiar with layering and maybe blending modes and masking. Are you familiar with all of those three things?
Yeah, I can, certainly not very accomplished at it, but I know the basics.
Well, you will be when you finish.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
My pleasure. I hope that helps.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Good. Well, I hope I've inspired you all.
Yeah, thank you.
You have.
Welcome.
Totally inspired.
Wow. Good.
You.
Like,
Really, really engaging. And I'll tell you, it's this is a different type of presentation than we've had, and really kudos to you for putting it on, and for Deb for tracking you down and doing that. And
Yes.
I also want to just say I always appreciate when you're doing judging for us, and appreciate the interaction with the club, Elliot.
Oh, you're welcome. I
Thank you so
enjoy it.
much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Well,
Yes, you're
you inspired
fantastic.
us all. Thank you so much, Elliot.
yeah, you're welcome, Deb.
you.
Thanks for tracking me down.
You're welcome.
Yep.